Let's explore how you feel about the one parent looking away while the other parent was abusing you. Abuse can come in all shapes and forms, obviously. Sexual, mental, verbal, physical, emotional. There's all types of abuse a child may go through. If it's a two-parent household, the abuse may be coming from one parent and they may be viewed as the evil parent, the actual perpetrator. But what about the one who is still in the household but chose to ignore everything going on? The parent who looked away, the parent who hid behind the newspaper, that knew full well what was happening but chose to ignore it all. The child who's been abused has all sorts of feelings about that parent, but they tend to get pushed away because you're more focused on the one who did the actual abuse. But depending on how you look at it, who's more guilty, so to speak? Is it the perpetrator or is it the other parent standing by and letting it happen? Maybe no answer here, but it certainly is worth pondering, because without pondering it, we may not be able to get in touch with all our feelings and all the impacts it's had on us from the parent who let it all happen. The confusing thing about it as well is that at least with the abusive parent, we see what we get. We know what's coming, but the parent that's distant and hidden, and the child may suspect indeed that they know what's going on. What's a kid gonna do with that? They're not going to know how to process that type of confusion. What they're learning is something along the line of hear no evil, see no evil. I know my dad must be in the other room hearing me scream as my mother beats me. Or I know my mom's just in the other room. She has to be able to hear me scream as my dad's in the bed with me, sexually assaulting me. So what they're learning, of course, from both the perpetrating parent and the evil silent parent is there's no one there to protect them. Life in general is providing no protection whatsoever. They're learning what it's like to trust. They're learning what it probably will be like in a marriage for them to have a relationship with somebody. In addition to having to process this abuse at some point in their life, all these symptoms that are going to come up, they're learning what it's like to be a man or a woman. As they get older and they're trying to sort through this all, hopefully with a therapist, they may ask themselves questions like, am I focusing on my mother because I just don't want to involve or blame my father? Or am I focusing on my father because I just don't want to blame or involve my mother? A child wants to believe, have the fantasy that at least one parent had their back, but sometimes that's not the case. The one parent who would have their back would be the parent who would immediately call the police and throw their spouse's butt out of the home if they ever see any type of abuse being heaped on that child from them. That's a protective parent. They would not let that continue in any way. But when you have a parent who lets abuse happen, sometimes for years and years, there's no protection whatsoever, and this all becomes very confusing to the child, of course. And that's what we call the parent who looked away, the parent who looked the other direction. Equally involved, of course, and we don't want to let them off the hook, because then the child may repress their feelings about that parent because the child knows on some level that parent knew. Because as a child, we may view the quiet parent as the better parent, the good parent. They're not the ones slapping me every day or crawling into bed with me at night or emotionally smothering. So in a child's mind, they're the good parent. But because we're not really connecting with them, because, for example, they may have guilt about the fact that they're hiding, they know they're hiding, then we may want to latch on to anything about that parent. We'll settle for crumbs, just give me something, because we're viewing them as the good parent. As a child grows up in these conditions, they may have a yearning, an ongoing desire to get to know the other parent. Who are they? What are they all about? They may be emotionally removed, sort of distant. And that's a way for them to hide. That's why they're being a bit distant. They may be thinking, well, I don't want to wreck my marriage. I still want to stay with my husband or my wife. So I'm just going to turn a blind eye. I'm going to act like nothing's going on. So for the child, they may have the obvious anger towards the parent who's the perpetrator, but more of a repressed anger for the parent who doesn't step in. But what happens with repressed anger? Well, when it's turned inward on ourselves, i.e. repressed, there it is, it's still there, then we're the ones who are going to suffer. We're paying now more of a price because we're not dealing with the actual anger we have towards the parent who let this all happen in the first place. So we perhaps strongly identify with something that they're showing us, giving us, role modeling for us. That thing that they're showing us may not even be necessarily healthy, but we want something in our life, some sort of belief or fantasy that anything has to be better than the parent who's actually doing the abuse. So now we can turn the silent parent into some sort of god in a way. But of course, they're not at all. This can impact our ability to trust, our levels of intimacy, our gender role modeling, because all we're learning is that a male does this or a female does this, depending on who's doing the abuse and depending on who's being the silent partner. And if we're getting the abuse from the same-sex parent, then that perhaps is how then we think we have to be when we grow up. That must be what love is. This is a marriage, I suppose. Or if we flip it around, if the silent parent is the same gender as the abused child, then that's forming the role modeling, right? Now they're thinking with lots of fantasy and imagination that that's the good parent. I want to be like them. So again, all of this becomes very insidious, very confusing. It's topsy-turvy because the child may be focusing just on the perpetrating parent and really letting the other parent off the hook. So if it's the same-sex parent and they're the quiet one, we may be learning that they're powerless. They can't do anything to step in and stop the abusive parent. So now that gender may be, in general, viewed as powerless. And then as the child gets older, they may have a reactive disorder to that. Now, there may be situations where a parent truly did not know that their spouse was abusing one of their children. And as soon as they find out, they haul that kid out of there and stop all of that from happening. But generally speaking, that's a little more rare than a parent who just stands by, hides behind the newspaper, and lets it continue. So the lesson here is be aware of your feelings not only about the abusive parent, but also about the silent partner who let it all unfold. So please let me know any comments you may have about this topic in the comment section below. Did you have a silent parent in your life? Please subscribe to my mental health YouTube channel if you like these kind of videos. And until next week, this is Brad Shore signing off from Ask a Shrink.